Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Parts Girl podcast. I'm interviewing Diana Shubert today. Welcome, Diana.
Thank you, Kaylee.
Thanks for being here. And I'm so excited that we connected through LinkedIn. I think it was through just a post and about parts, and we just connected that way because you've been in the industry a long time in parts. So,
A long time. Started back in the 80s.
aw, that's awesome. So
So I
you've got
still look
stories.
young, right?
No, you're still young and you look great. So, but I'm excited to interview you because as a woman in the industry, I think there's a lot of perceptions or there's a lot of obstacles or things that and let's say first too, we've come a long way since when you
Absolutely.
started. But I want to get into like how did you overcome all the obstacles or because you were really you were I remember when we were talking you were seen as the cashier but you wanted to be in parts and you
Yeah,
yeah
I was going to the aftermarket store, buying parts for my Camaro and rebuilding my engine in my apartment. But so I kept telling them, hire me, and then they finally hired me, but they put me as a cashier, and that only lasted about 2 weeks. And then I got put to the counter. And then from there, it just progressed and being involved with women's clinics. Um,
wait I want to back up. You were working on your engine in your apartment. Why
yeah,
didn't you go the technician route or mechanic route?
I never thought about that. It's just, it was something for enjoyment for me,
It was just
but,
fun for
you
you.
know, I didn't
Yeah,
even think about it then because, again,
at that
it was a tough business for women to get into, but I wouldn't even have thought about that. So,
that's
but
true that
today, there's a
today.
lot more women that are getting involved because it's more technical too. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, I didn't even think about that. I was just, it's just, I wanted to get into the business and, working on my own vehicle and buying the parts. I know what people are going to come in there and look for.
Yeah. And what, so you said you wanted to get into the business. What was it about the business that was
It's challenging.
wanted? The
It's
challenging.
challenging. It's not easy. You're trying to figure out what's going on with the vehicle. Of course, back when I started, it was a lot different, a lot of classic cars and you're dealing with, you know, multiple components, with the electric part of it. Today it's more technical, but back then, it's about getting the right cam. What do you want to get out of that engine? So, like with the transmission, I've rebuilt transmissions. So it's a lot different today
Mhm.
than it was then because when you're dealing with classic cars, it's easier. And then today's it's more techno. And if you don't have that technology today, it's not easy to fix.
That's true. Well, and you do have to have that understanding of like, well, if you're going to fix this, you also should look at these things and these you're going to need these parts to go into this area of fixing. You have to know all the
Well,
different parts.
it's like when I was rebuilding a carburetor, of course, cars don't have carburetors now, and I dropped the screw and it went down the intake. I said, oh my God, no, I've got to get that screw out of the intake. I can't start this engine with that screw in there from the carburetor, so, it was fun, during that time because you had to really think about what you were doing,
Hmm.
to get that engine to purr like you want it to, you know.
That's so
And
fun.
rebuilding carburetors is not an easy thing either. So, but yeah, it's with the high rise manifold and the, you know, Holly 600, double pumper on top, it's challenging.
So you like the challenge. That's why you wanted to get into it. And
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
you were in cashier for lasted about a couple weeks, went into parts on the counter, and I think you quickly went into management.
Yeah, I went into building up the stores and then became a floating manager to cover all the different, like over 10 stores for the area.
Hmm.
And so it was, you had to adapt and learn and um, it's,
Did you run
I,
into any challenges at that during that time with your
oh,
employees and people not like who's this chick trying to
I had an article written about it, people was like, oh, I want to talk to this guy right there, and I said, okay, no problem. Go talk to him. And then the guy comes to me and is like, what is he talking about? And I'm like, well, he's talking about this because, back then there was a lot of catalogs. I took the catalogs home and read them. And I learned a lot from the catalogs because back then there was a lot of information in there that you could learn about the components and how they, interact with the vehicle and such. So I did that. And I also, I carried my own catalogs with me with every store that I went to. Um, but they end up coming talking to me. It's like, oh, and then they're like, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to
you know
come across that way that you didn't know because you're a woman.
yeah, and it still happens today. It
It
does.
still happens today. Again, when people ask me, so what do you do? I'm in the automotive. Oh, so you sell cars? No, I'm in fixed operations, parts and service.
Well, they're like, what's fixed operation? If especially if they're not in industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't realize that it's a challenging career to begin with, but it's also very rewarding. But again, that women, they tend to look at them like, what do you know about a vehicle? What do you know about this? And the thing is, they know probably a lot more than what you give them credit for.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a prime example. I've worked my way up from a cashier to the counter to parts, to running, management, parts, and then service. So it's, you know, and again, the other part is, I have bus and truck industry as well, and I sold vehicles. So it's, people kind of want to classify you as that you don't know what's going on when when you really commit yourself to the job and want to do a great job. So you're committed to learn and to help that customer. That's the biggest thing is you want to help that customer.
Yeah, I mean, we all have vehicles, so we want to help and make sure that they have the best service possible and have a running safe vehicle. But I did want to ask you, what advice would you give any woman that's considering this industry? And a lot of times we don't even really realize we're considering it. It just kind of happens. But
Yeah,
what advice would you give?
every time I try to think about getting out of it, I want to get back into it because it's challenging. And women want to be challenged. Don't give up, just keep at it.
Hmm.
When you dedicate yourself to do a good job, people are going to see it. But, you know, don't let that one person that says, well, what do you know?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's, it's don't let that stop you because I think that's one thing about women is that we don't want to be stopped. We want to keep going forward. We want to learn. We want to engage and
Hmm.
learn. And over, we're overachievers. We really
Well,
are.
I totally believe that. I think a lot of the time we are like, if someone says we can't do something, we're gonna
We're
prove
going
them
to
wrong.
find a way to figure it out, you
Yes.
know? And I think
But
that's our
maybe
nature.
that's intimidating. Maybe that's why that's why I'm not saying I don't want to put everyone in buckets, but
Well,
like maybe that's why it happens where what do you know? It's because of the intimidation of like, well, maybe I don't know now, but I'm gonna figure it out.
yeah, again, it's not being afraid to learn.
Yeah.
I think we are overachievers and we're multitaskers. We know how to, like with parts, you're dealing with a lot of different things,
Hmm.
parts coming in, you got the inventory, you're covering all these different things, service, you got the customer coming in, you got the technicians, you got the service advisor. So you got a lot of things coming at you. but we're very adaptable and very multitask, and we're not afraid to be overachievers. And the biggest thing that I try to instill with the people that I work with is I tell them, I'm not afraid of you wanting my job. I want you to want my job. And I think that that's part of the problem too, is that you think that you have to do so much to, to protect your job, and, you got this
Yeah.
knowledge, but don't be afraid to share it, because when you share it, you're empowering people
Hmm.
to be better, and it helps you.
Yeah.
So,
No, that, I mean, if you look at parts managers that, historically, or what we've seen over the years is they typically don't delegate or share a lot of information.
no.
And I
And because they're scared, and they shouldn't be scared, because
Mhm.
if they empower their people, they make themselves better, and it makes their job easier, because it is a tough job,
And it's a
you know,
tough job.
yeah,
And
because you're again, you're accounting, you're involved with the office and the CEO and the accountants and all this kind of stuff. And it's the largest asset of the dealership. So
yep.
don't be afraid to empower your people.
Don't be afraid to empower your people. And don't what was I gonna say? And I like to say too, parts is probably the one like department that has a like at least four different businesses within that department.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it
Retail, wholesale, new cars.
online.
Yeah. It's not an easy endeavor. So
No.
again, it's very challenging.
Yeah.
And I think that people that think that parts is easy, when you talk to GMs and such, and I'm not trying to badmouth anyone, but if you have a GM that hasn't worked in fixed ops, they're looking at the numbers, and I understand everything's numbers. I get that. But one guy that I worked for that was at Toyota, which is very empowering with women in the industry, is that he came from fixed ops, and all of his people within his industry came from fixed ops, not sales. And so he never, his longevity with the staff stayed.
Yeah.
So it's,
It's it is a tough thing, I think, because most GMs didn't come through fixed ops. And
no,
I think it goes back to though, like it's one of those tough things. It's like their experience or their journey didn't take them through fix, and we can't discredit that
no,
they, yeah, like
because they
it's
don't
a hard
understand.
balance, right?
Right.
Yeah, because like for me, for example, my experience and my journey didn't come from that I didn't work in a dealership. But we can't discredit my knowledge or my experience that I've, worked
No,
on this side of the business. So it's I get like it's a hard thing to balance because I know parts managers get so frustrated with their GMs or dealers because they're like, well, they've never worked in this department, or they're asking me to do this, but they're speaking a different language.
yeah, again, I think that, the more knowledge that the GM has, with the different operations, I'm not trying to discount them. I'm just telling
No,
you
I know you're not.
that, when they come from that side, you find that your fixed operation crew stays.
They'd say, yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, and I think the GMs that maybe haven't come up from fix, it would maybe be a good idea to like spend more time in that area to really like show that you're wanting to learn and you're, trying to understand. And I think that's how GMs could really, get that experience without actually having that
Right.
experience.
Yeah. Again, going back to Toyota, when
Yeah.
I worked for Toyota, again, the guy was, he came up in the dealership, from body shop, and buying dealerships, Lexus and Toyota. When they come from that side, they understand the challenges, you know. There's challenges with sales too,
There.
I get that. but there's a lot of challenges with parts and service, and you've got a lot going on. You got technicians, you got parts advisors, you got service advisors. It's there. It's very dynamic. Part of the background, and I think if like you said, if they would go back and kind of you know set themselves in there to see what's really going on. I don't think that most of them don't know what's going on. I just, if they would just sit back there and really get involved, and then they would like, wow,
Yeah.
I thought sales was bad. This customer that came in here,
Yeah.
you know,
It's a
but
totally.
again, I'm not taking anything away from the GMs that had not worked in fixed ops,
Yeah.
but I think that there's a lot to learn with that avenue and with their staffing.
Mhm.
And when the staff knows that their GM is like, wow, he's really involved or she's really involved, and then they're committed. They're there for you. And that's what I saw when I was at Toyota. So
Yeah. So, what can we do as an industry to help kind of get more women in the industry and show that it's a really great opportunity and it's really, we can
I
do
think that,
amazing things.
people are still stereotyped that you've got a child or you got parents, you got this, and they don't think that they're going to be dedicated, you know, and that's farther from the truth. I think if you give them that opportunity, you'll find a very loyal employee for your industry,
Yeah.
because they are giving, and that's what a customer wants. They want someone that cares about them, and I think that's what women do so much better than men. Not saying men aren't caring, but I think women are more adaptable and relate to the customer that's in front of them.
It's more of our natural nature. So, it just comes easier to women.
I think, yeah, it's easier to relate to people.
Yeah. So that, I mean, there's so much opportunities. You can have such a great career going into
Oh,
automotive,
absolutely.
and I think that if we, vendors, dealerships can get more involved in the communities and the high schools and trade schools, that's how the industry can really pull in some
Yeah.
more
And
talent.
again, it's if they would target more women, I think they would be impressed on what they get.
Yeah. Or
And
you could
not
target subways in restaurants.
you know, here's a prime example of back in Virginia. I was talking to a very dear friend of mine, and who he's part of a big company there, but an ice cream store. Because they went in there and this woman took care of them so much, they hired her, and she has been with them since, and never loyal to them, no matter what, you know, and that's what you get, you know. And I think that they forget about that. They still have that stereotype that you're a motherhood, you're this, you're that, but in reality, it comes back to service. They're about giving service to the customer, taking care of the customer, um, and they give it their all, and they don't give up.
That is true. We do not give up. I have a
No.
similar story. I was vetted out of the Subway restaurant I was managing. That's how I got into the industry. So
Oh,
that's why I jokingly say like just go hang out at a Subway restaurant or a
yeah.
fast food place because then you
Some
can
type of service place that
service.
people
Yeah,
are really good about giving good service.
exactly. And you can really see, that I want that person. And then you just ask them if they know anyone that's hiring or if you
Yeah.
know anyone
Well,
that's looking.
it all comes down. It's not about your knowledge. It's about your attitude and how you present
It
yourself.
is.
You can be trained.
Yes.
Anyone can be trained. You cannot train attitude and dedication and loyal.
And you know what? I think our industry is really good about not having any like pre-requirements. You know, like we're really good at like you can do customer service. Okay, you can come try this out. Like we're
Yeah. But you can train people, you
exactly. You
know?
can train people.
Again, attitude and customer service is you can't train that. If you have it, you have it, but you can train someone on knowledge.
You
So,
can.
so we're going back to what you asked me. It's like, I think they should be, should target more women because I think they'll have more loyalty and dedication to this industry and they'll be really surprised on what they get on ROI.
Yeah. And the biggest piece I think is the loyalty. So to change it up a little bit before we wrap up, I want to just kind of get just some of your plans for your future and goals that you have for, you. What are you doing?
Well, I've been doing some photography and I was talking to a friend of mine. It's like, why didn't you get into sales? I have real estate sales background too. And I'm like, wow, I should have thought about that because I'm good with numbers. I should have gotten sales and I could get an F&I because I am a numbers person. I think that's my next avenue is to get into sales and work my way up because I'm good with numbers. I'm good with customers. I that's going to be my next avenue.
That's exciting. And I think that's a really cool thing to broaden your experience. So you're just not doing the same thing forever. It's like,
Yeah.
I want to experience this part of the industry or this part of business because you very much spent most of your career in parts, right? Like that's where you
Mostly in parts. So, but I do have a little bit of sales background with the bus and truck. I have sales background with real estate. So,
well,
I'm
sale,
good.
sale parts is sales. It's all sales.
Yep, it's all sales. So,
Business is sales.
um, and I know vehicles. I like vehicles. I like talking to customers. I like that engagement. So that's me. I want to get engaged with the customer. I'm ready for that next level. It's like, when you get to that plateau, I'm ready for that next plateau for me.
Yeah, you want to get there. I definitely understand that because you set goals, you get to where you want to be, and you keep on reaching and going, and that's a whole nother conversation too. Was like, is being satisfied or content with where you are, but also being okay that it's okay to continue to reach. Because
Yeah.
that's something I struggle with. Like I've accomplished so much, but there's so much more I want to accomplish. But it doesn't mean I'm not happy and content with what
Right.
I have now. And I think
Yeah.
there's a difference, right? When you're like, I always just not happy and not going, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
To me, I've done it so long that it's not a challenge and I have to
You need a
challenge
challenge.
myself.
Yeah.
You know, I can do it. You know, I know how to make it happen. I know, the structure, the process, and how to build a team. So I've done it so long that it's not challenging to me. And I have to challenge myself. So I am past that level where I need to go to the next level.
Yeah. I get that. Oh, that's very exciting. I'm glad that you shared that. And I'm so glad you came on the podcast because I think
Well, thank you
anyone
so much.
is going to be inspired by your story and just there's just so much again amazing opportunities in automotive and you can go in so many different directions.
Yeah,
So,
again, I think that women don't realize how much they can achieve in this industry, not only mentally, physically, and financially. There's so much there for them. And they just need to have that opportunity and not be afraid to take that leap.
yeah,
Once you take that leap, you're like, why did I do this sooner?
exactly.
Like with you, it's a challenge, to learn the industry. When you're talking to a lot of different people and you're learning a lot of different avenues and and such, and it's just challenging.
That's exactly what I loved about where it's still challenging for me, but
And you
that's
learn. You're
learn
constantly learning.
constantly,
Always.
constantly adapting, changing, but the challenge of figuring out how to sell to parts managers
And
has been
not be
a
like,
challenge.
oh my God, here's a salesperson again.
I know. I actually there was recently I got on the meeting and they're cute and my boss was on the meeting with us. It was like a pre-kickoff call and he's like the only reason why we're talking is because Kaylee's a good salesperson. She's the only salesperson that hasn't pissed me off. I was like he's like I
Well,
don't even really know what you guys do.
yeah, but if you don't come across as being sales, you come across as being to help them, you know?
Exactly. That's
You,
always that's always been my strategy or my thing
it's
is
not
because
about sales, it's about helping them get to that
helping.
next level.
Yes. I'm not like you're doing it wrong. I'm like this is so much
Yeah,
like
that does not work well,
no. That is not
especially
that
if
like
you're a woman.
yeah. I'm like you're doing it right. Here's a tool to make you do it better and faster.
No. Hey, have you seen this? Let me show you
Yeah.
something.
Yeah,
Let me,
exactly.
what do you think about this? Like, oh, I never thought about that.
Yeah. It's
Wow, light bulb goes off.
and they're like, you're not trying to get me to buy more parts? No.
No, I just tried. I'm here to help you.
Yeah. Oh, the challenges. It's definitely come a long way.
Yeah,
And it does go back to you looking at yourself too, because looking back to when I first started and figuring things out, I lacked confidence, and I've worked really hard to educate myself and have that confidence of like I do know what you're talking about. I understand what you're going through. I personally have not been a parts manager, but I have talked to so many and I know what you're going through. Like I
right.
know.
And that's
And
where
I know I can help.
women relate, and that's what
Hmm.
people love is that you can
Yes.
relate to them. And then next thing you know, is like you got a new friend, you know,
Yeah.
a new business partner. So that's how you build the relationship. And I think that's what, again, going back to women being in this industry, we can relate to the customer, we can relate to the manager, we can relate to the many different aspects of the business.
Yes. It's a talent to be able to put yourself
More,
in other.
yeah, you morph into the position.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's you're definitely just putting yourself in other people's shoes or looking at them like, not like this is what I know and this is how like it's how am I explaining that right? Like,
No, and the other thing is that you over educate yourself
yeah.
because you want to know every little detail that what you're going to deal with so that if you encounter it, you can have an answer for it.
Yes. That's the fun part. So I'm I'm so glad I got the chance to interview you and yeah, I'm excited for what's next for you and
Me
I
too.
yeah, I can't wait to check in and, hear what you're doing. So,
Yeah,
uh
I was talking to a guy at the elevator. It's like, hey, I was like, what are you doing? I said, well, I've done this, I've done that. So, it's like well, I work at this dealership down here, and I can get you in. I'm like, okay, great. And again, that's the other part is you have to communicate and talk to people, not be afraid
yes.
to share what's going on and to engage with people because you never know who does what and who they know.
That is so true. And even like going back to just communicating what's going on in your world to anyone that you regularly communicate so that they can understand if you snap at them, it's because your cat died or like something went wrong in your life. So I feel like humans just need to communicate what's going on in their lives and then we would all have a better understanding of thing and wouldn't be so pissed off because
That's another subject
responded in
that
a
we've been
different
talking
way.
about, is engaging with your employees to figure out what's the problem. You know, because so many people want, you know, I had people like, fire them, fire them. No, it's not my job to fire them. I'm trying, it's costly to let people go. You have to find out what's going on. And it could be something simple. They just need to talk about something. You know, it's, you don't know what's going on in people's lives. So you have to be able to encounter that and figure out, you know, it's like, okay, this is what's going on. How can I engage them? You know, let them know everything's okay, you know, that so we can move forward. And that's all people want is you to engage with them. And then everything, guess what? It's good again.
Yeah. It's communication. And not everyone openly communicates. You have to figure that out. But I think that's a whole nother topic.
Oh yeah, again, that's another topic.
We covered the good stuff. We covered,
Yeah, absolutely.
Women in automotive, the challenging
Don't be
challenges.
stereotype, you know.
Yeah, all the
You know, it's
things.
like I can put my hair up, you know, and I was like, oh, who's that? And then let it down, you know. I was like, okay, you know, it's appearances can be misleading.
They can. And sometimes we're judged on our appearances.
We are judged.
Yes. And that's
So, and that's why we overeducate ourselves to be better at it. And that's why we're overachievers to do the job.
yeah. Well, thank you again, Diana. I think
Thank you, Kaylee.
this is very good. So if anyone wants to reach out to you, you're on LinkedIn. We'll have your link
am.
out there. And again, thanks so much for coming on the show.
All right. Thank you. And hope your dog's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. PartsEdge, the power tool for your parts department. We hope you're leaving feeling motivated, challenged, and inspired.